Welcome back to Woman, Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda. And we are coming together to share our conversations where we both learn from each other and cross those racial lines on sensitive topics about race. Today's topic, Bernadette.
Today's topic, we are going to talk about the making of race, because truly, biologically and physiologically, we're all one race. That is the human race. However, racial groups is something that has been used throughout the history of mankind to create hierarchies and discriminate against each other. And so we are going to delve into how race was truly created.
Excellent beginning. All right, so to start with, I'm reading the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, who's a wonderful historian and author. And I came to this part recently and I wanted to share it. So he's going into the fact that slavery has existed for a long time. People would enslave other people. They would pull people from all sorts of disadvantaged positions and make them slaves. But there was no particular effort to enslave a particular color of people, a particular nationality of people. Slaves were taken from all different, they were European slaves, there were Arabic slaves, there were African slaves. But here's where the history begins. There was a royal man named Prince Henry the Navigator, who was the brother of Portuguese kings in the 1400s. And he managed to finance and direct and spearhead a group of Portuguese sailors to go around they went to West Africa, and they managed to avoid and circumvent the Arabic slave traders, Islamic slave traders, and just pick up Black African slaves. That's it. They didn't go for all of them. And they began at the dawn of the modern world, that would be oddly in the 1400s, the Portuguese began to exclusively trade African bodies. Prince Henry's sailors made history when they navigated past the feared black hole of Cape Bojador off Western Sahara and brought enslaved Africans back to Portugal. But then it's the biographers, it's the historians that go ahead from there. And they began to talk about it, and they began to describe why these slaves were superior. They were hard workers. They were really stupid in various ways. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's the way they began to describe them and to create the modern sense of race. Here's where the skin colors began to happen. In this writer, the historian Zahara's stories chronicled Prince Henry's first major slave auction in Lagos, Portugal in 1444. Some captives were white enough, fair enough to look upon, and well proportioned, while others were like mulattoes or as black as Ethiopians and so ugly. So Zahara, I'm sorry, I apologize for the mispronunciations. He grouped them into one group of people worthy of enslavement, and then they began to categorize. So a few years later then, in 1481, a French poet used the word race in a hunting poem, and they began to categorize. Race was, well, this was a race of dogs. It's like if you took the different parts of dogs and said, well, this kind of dog is superior to that kind, and it began to be used as a category. From the beginning, to make races was to make racial hierarchy, which is what you said in those first few sentences, Bernadette. So then they began to get more and more detailed until finally in Sweden in 1735, Carl Linnaeus, who's familiar, I think it's a familiar name, Linnaeus was a categorizer. And he locked in racial hierarchy of humankind in a book called Systema Natura. Again, pronunciation, I should look these up ahead. He color coded the races as white, yellow, red, and black. And he attached each race to one of the four regions of the world, as if you said, this grows here, this grows here, this grows here, and this grows here, and here are the qualities. And that's when all this got locked in. The Linnaeus taxonomy became the blueprint that nearly every race maker followed, and that race makers still follow today. I began to think of the children's song, Red and Yellow, Black and White. It's like, let's put all these in nice little neat categories, and then we can define them. And of course, these were not simply neutral categories, because races were never meant to be neutral. Racist power created them for a purpose. Now, I don't think I'm going to read this whole thing because it's rather disturbing, but from then on, Linnaeus positioned Homo sapiens europaeus at the top of racial hierarchy and said, these are the qualities of the white race. They are vigorous, they are intelligent, they are innovative, and so forth. These are the qualities of the Asian race, and they are this, they are that. And of course, they go on down more and more unflattering, more and more discriminatory. And then the
darker you get,
and of course, black,
the more derogatory it is. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And there was the Asian, and there was the Americanus, which would have been the native populations of the Americas. And they all were described. And when I read these, it's not only disturbing, but it's also like, oh, this is like the beginning of stereotypes. This is the beginning of stereotypes. And
the creation of stereotypes.
The creation of stereotypes. And I mean, I don't know. It's disturbing. But that piece was written in 1735. But the first efforts to separate not just people who were slaves, but people by color, and say, it's like if they took a product, like you and I were, oh no, that was one of the speakers I was hearing this morning, took a product and said, well, our product is better than yours. Essentially, that's what the Portuguese did. They took Black Africans only and said, these are superior slaves, so here, buy from us. I mean, it's just appalling in every sense of the word. So that's a little history for you there. I'm not even sure where we go from that today, but I can tell you that I'm learning things that are really hard to take in from studying history that includes Black history. It's not just Black history, because obviously they've been interwoven for centuries, but it is the history of the truth of what was happening. And that's really life-changing and mind-opening for me personally. Bernadette, what comments do you have from them?
I would call it whole history, because the history that we've been taught here in America is only from one vantage point. It is not a cumulative or collective history as it was experienced from different perspectives. We have only learned history from one vantage point, and that is that of a white man and what they were allowed to dominate. But it does give you, to me, it gives me a greater understanding of how deep-rooted and long-standing our biases and stereotypes and discriminatory thoughts actually are. It is centuries and centuries old. You said 1400s? When the Portuguese, began circumventing and saying, we only want this particular hue of slave to enslave and sell to others. That's centuries and centuries and centuries old.
Exactly. From the 1400s, the mid 1400s in Portugal. And you could say rightfully that people were brutal to each other before that, and there was slavery, but slavery was not by color before that. It was just power over disempowered.
Yes, because it typically happened like if one tribe or group conquered another, then the group who had lost whatever they had lost or been conquered became slave. It was not, I'm specifically going after this group because they are Black or darker brown.
Right.
It was more like a land, or like you said, a power acquisition. So whoever lost, they became the slaves.
Right.
Now, and I think we also need to recognize, with that being said, that slavery in the United States was unlike slavery just about anywhere else in the world. And I don't think people recognize that, because they'll say, well, we've had slaves since the beginning of time. Yes, we have. But it was not the type of targeted, continual terror that it was and has been in the United States.
That makes sense. because when you read that part, the Portuguese were literally targeting. They were, for
Yes.
whatever reason, maybe they said this is a superior physical specimen or something. Who knows exactly what they said, but they said we're going after Black Africans, and to do that, we have to get around this dangerous part of the ocean, and we have to do this. But once we do, we're going to have really top-notch slaves, and that's kind of where it began. And then from there they started race making. There's no other good word for it, race making, because before that it would have been tribes and it would have been hues and so forth, but not races as if they're separate. You know, they're, I mean, sure, individuals are different, but quite the same, but it's biologically inside we are the same. And culturally, it's dramatically different. Yeah, go ahead. You were going to say something there.
Yeah. When you were reading those things, I was thinking I think it was Linnaeus. I was like, they essentially part and parcel us out like we were animals. Like, so you have the group canines, but then there's different breeds within the group. And it's like they breeded us as human beings. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, it does. And I'm glad to have you say it, because I didn't want to say it, but it's true. It's like white Europeans treated Blacks in the Americas, but even starting before that, like livestock. And that's horrible to say, but it is a truth. And it's like we need to look at even to the breeding, you know. And I think it was
that speaks to your pop-up that you did not too long ago about we need to recognize that in America we have been taught to think of Black people as subhuman, but that goes all the way back to there.
It does. It absolutely does. And it's a power thing. It's, you know, the chapter where he's talking about this is not called race making, it's called power. And the purpose of the racial hierarchy was always to create hierarchy, to create power, to describe we are the top ones. And then this one is a little below us, and this one's below that, and here's the bottom of the heap. And so therefore we can do anything we want to these people. And it's, again, like I said in that pop-up a few weeks ago, it's what all nations or groups have to do in order to get people on board to do harm to other people. You have to make them believe they're not really people. And that's how it's done. Sam Keen was the first one I read on that topic. It's in a book called The Faces of the Enemy, where historically he had illustrations from dozens of different conflicts and wars where this side would make the enemy to be subhuman, cockroaches or anything. And that enabled the soldiers then to say, well, I'm not really killing a human being. I'm actually killing a cockroach. I'm killing a whatever. So the terminology, the names, the illustrations in the mind, the stereotypes, and this was a major plug in that. And oddly, Linnaeus is still quoted. And, you know, we don't think of different hues. We think of a race of people. But we don't think of, and again, the livestock, we don't think of a race of dogs. You say dogs are dogs. And then there's different breeds, you know, there's different tribes, there's different colors, there's different appearances and all of those, but they're all dogs. We are all humans, but we've been taught to think there's huge category differences. This is making.
And so, not only was he successful in, I guess, establishing that the European humans were supreme and above all else, by categorizing each one out that's just popped up in when you were of a better word, that then I'm right under European, then why would I want to associate with someone who's 2 or 3 rungs down versus those who have all been designated to be lower, collectively working together to build strength? You part and parcel people out, as in a hierarchy, those who are above will never want to associate with those who are deemed to be below. And so that
Right.
keeps whoever's been dubbed top at top, because the rest of them are going to be fighting to be second, third, no, second or third. And so,
Right. Instead of trying to see and understand the system that's in place. So
yes.
this is one piece, I mean, only one piece, but this is one piece of what we are talking about when we talk about systemic racism. And it's like to not be able to see that is just making us all blind, because it's real. It's really there. And it was put in place. You said something, I don't remember your words a few minutes ago, but I was going to say it was very intentional. It was extremely intentional. And from the writings from several hundred years ago, you could see that it was intentional then. It is still intentional by many people. And a lot of people that mean well don't understand that. And it's like, that's where we have to start educating ourselves. We have to see what's really going on, because there's a lot of different things that have to shift if we're going to eliminate it. And that's one of them. So
that's a big one. That's a big one.
It's a very big one. And so we're calling this episode The Making of Race and Power Structures, something like that. So,
because again, it truly was a made up construct
right,
to discriminate against different groups of people and establish dominance by one. True.
Right. And at the beginning, it was less about discrimination and more about commercialization. Like, our slaves are better than your slaves. So there you go. You've created it to create a product out of people. And because that's immoral, you have to say, well, they're not really people. And that's why it's okay. They're superior livestock. And pardon me for saying these things, but I'm trying to say this is the shocking truth of where this all started. And sometimes we have to let ourselves be shocked, so I'm sure there are many other writers covering it, but I will hold this up once again. This is Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. He's written a number of different things. He's on various programs right now. You can see what he's talking about. He's a National Book Award winning author now. And there's history there, but there's lots of other writers too, both white and Black, but especially Black, are diving into the history. And as Bernadette said, we should be calling this whole history. We've been studying white history and actually white male history, because women have been shut out of history too. And we see that, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. She did this amazing thing. Why didn't we learn about that? Well, because white males were writing the history. That's why. So it's a common thing. And we're encouraging you to start learning the whole history, which isn't that hard to find now. We can find aspects of it. So
yes, it isn't that hard to find. It can be hard to conceptualize and receive, because it is totally different than the perspective of the white man, but that does not make it any less true.
Exactly. Precisely. So. All right. Bernadette, you want to close?
Well, we've given a lot to think about. Again, thank you, Linda, for sharing that from Ibram X. Kendi. As we've said in our videos, he is a very straightforward and informative writer. So if you are not there in your journey yet, we have often mentioned White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo as a starting point.
Yes.
If you are ready to do some work and committed to saying, I need to figure out what my piece of this puzzle is and how I go about changing it, then we would recommend Dr. Kendi.
A good maybe caveat a little more, there.
Yes, maybe a bit more digestible if you're at that stage in your journey. So can start talking, keep talking, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.